Good afternoon, gardeners. It's Tuesday, March 30th, and I'm interrupting my normal upload schedule because we have an emergency on our hands. We are going to have a severe cold front that's going to be sweeping through the eastern portion of the country the nights of April 1st and April 2nd, and all-time record lows are being threatened. So many of us here in the south and the southeast are going to see freezing temperatures and frost when we're normally well beyond our last frost date at this point. And if you're like me, you already have a number of tender annuals planted out in the garden, and you have a lot of deciduous trees that have already leafed out on you or are starting to flower and threaten damage from frost. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to discuss how to protect your tender annuals, especially your larger trees that have already probably leafed out on you and maybe it's too much for you to protect with traditional means like blankets and covers. If you're like me, you already have some tender annuals planted out in your garden. I have a dozen tomatoes that are in ground right now, and with this frost and freeze coming in, it threatens to ruin my entire start to my tomato season. And believe it or not, the tender annuals are not my biggest concern right now. Tender annuals can usually be protected from frost just with a simple nursery container or some other type of cover. Just recently, I posted a video, which I will link to above, about using these empty milk jugs as a greenhouse of sorts. Generally, you can just go ahead and plop any container right over your tomato plants or your pepper plants or any of your other tender annuals, and then you just take the soil around it and you bunch that around the base, and that will hold in the heat. That will create a frost cover, and that's usually good for light frosts or very light freezes for protecting your tender annuals. Also, believe it or not, my biggest concern aren't even my container fruit trees. While I have a number of container fruit trees that are beginning to leaf out, generally I'm able to provide frost protection for the container trees simply by picking them up and moving them up against the side of my house. It's really annoying and it's a lot of work, but the radiant heat of the house is usually sufficient to keep frosts off of my trees. My biggest concerns by far are my trees that are in ground that are difficult to protect, or there are too many of them to protect. An example here would be my tropical avocado tree, which is in full bloom right now, and my many in-ground deciduous trees that have broken dormancy and are fully leafing out. You've seen me make many videos on winter protection in the past, and usually winter protection is very simple because it only winds up having to protect the least cold hardy trees because all of your deciduous trees are in full dormancy. But what happens when you get a late frost in the spring and all of your deciduous trees are already awake? How can you possibly protect all of these things? I don't own nearly enough blankets or sheets or frost cloths or covers to blanket literally everything in my yard. And that's exactly the problem that I'm facing right now. Deciduous trees are very cold hardy when they are in full dormancy. Trees like figs and persimmons and pears and apples and peaches and plums, they can survive deep freezes when they are in full dormancy and asleep for the winter. However, once they start leafing out like this, all of this tender growth is very susceptible to a frost. Where a deciduous tree that's fully dormant can take temperatures well below freezing, often sometimes below zero, trees that are sending out new tender growth can be killed back simply by light frosts. Things can become even worse if your trees are actively flowering. While the wood on deciduous trees is normally very hardy to frost and freeze, the flowers themselves are not, and a late frost can come in and wipe out your entire fruiting crop for the next season. So anything that has really new tender growth or active flowers on them has to be protected against frost. So what exactly can you do if you can't protect every single tree that you own with some kind of physical barrier or a sheet of some sort? Well, I'm going to give you 3 tips that you can use to help defend your trees against a light frost or a freeze if you're not able to physically cover them with some kind of barrier. And this is going to be very helpful for any kind of backyard gardeners that have large swaths of edible landscaping, or if you're the kind of gardener that has practically some kind of orchard set up and you need mass protection for many trees. The first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your trees are as well hydrated as possible before a frost or freeze event. What most people don't realize about frost is the damage comes from the desiccation of the wood. So ice crystals form on the wood itself and it draws out moisture from inside the wood and it becomes very dry and brittle. that is your frost damage. So if you hydrate your trees as much as possible before a frost or freeze event, it takes more time for that frost to actually damage the wood. So the better hydrated they are, the more tolerant they are to the damage before it becomes really catastrophic. It does not prevent the damage, but it can delay it, or it can lessen the damage. And it's not enough to just water your trees right before the event. You generally want to do this 12 to 24 hours before the event so they can fully uptake that water and get it into all of their tissues. So try to do this the day before the frost or freeze event. The second thing you want to do if you're going to have a frost event happening overnight is you want to hose down your tree very well before the actual temperatures drop enough to cause a frost. So let's say you're going to get a light frost overnight. Come outside around 8 or 9 p.m. after the sun has set and hose down your tree completely so it stays dripping wet all night. And what you're doing is you're creating an insulative water barrier on the tree so the frost will be more difficult to stick. Now, this is not something you want to do if you have a hard freeze coming. If you're going to have a low of 28 or 29 degrees, this is probably bad advice because it's going to actually freeze and you're going to freeze all that water on the tree and it could damage your leaves. This is just to keep one of those light radiative frosts off. So I have a forecast low of about 35 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit with calm winds. That is going to possibly accumulate a light radiative frost on my trees. Wetting things down will help prevent this because it is harder for the frost to stick to very dry wood. We want to keep it wet because that level of water is going to insulate the tree a little bit and the frost is going to have to overcome the heat of the water itself in order to stick. So this is just going to create a very light barrier of protection on the tree against a radiative light frost. And the third and final tip that I'm going to give you to protect your trees is to run sprinklers on a timer to come on at about 3 a.m. or so. And you want to do that because, generally speaking, the coldest part of the evening is between 3 to 5 a.m. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my sprinkler system to come on for about 20 minutes at 3 a.m. And what that is going to do is it will both knock off any frost that may have formed on these trees up until that point, and it will also create a warm temporary microclimate around my trees so no more frost forms until sunrise when it sufficiently warms up. And citrus farmers in Florida have actually been doing something similar to this for generations. They have their sprinklers, they come on in a micro mist in the middle of the night, and it helps warm the orchard when there's going to be a marginal freeze. Now, similar to tip number 2, this is something that you want to do if you're going to get a frost. If you're going to get an actual physical freeze, it's not a good idea to do because if you hose your trees down, you could actually get damage if the water on those trees freezes because you have temperatures that are significantly below freezing. And what the Florida citrus farmers do to try and prevent that is they have the sprinklers come on for 20 minutes, then they go off for 20 minutes, they come on for 20 minutes, they go off for 20 minutes. So they constantly heat up the area and they keep that water moving. And if it does freeze on the trees, it actually winds up insulating the trees from the freeze. You probably can't do that with your residential sprinkler system. So if you're going to get temperatures far below freezing, it's not really a good idea. But again, in my position and in a lot of people's positions where there's the chance of a light radiative frost, it is protective. So I will make sure that I put my sprinkler systems to come on in the middle of the night and warm things back up, melt any frost that may have formed, and that should keep things sufficiently warm enough until sunrise so no more frost will form on my trees. And those are 3 things that you can do if you're being threatened with a very late frost in your climate like I am. And again, these are only measures that you want to take if you have too many trees that you can't protect them with some kind of physical barrier or protection. It's always better to put some kind of frost cloth or sheet or tarp or bucket over the trees or the annuals. This is only something that you want to do is if you have so many things leafing out or budding like I do that you can't possibly protect all of those things because you just don't have the ability to do it. These are three things that you can do to potentially lessen the damage. And that's another thing. These things are not guaranteed to prevent any damage. You may still take damage if you follow these methods. It is just meant to lessen it, so when your trees come back, they can recover faster from this damage, and hopefully you won't get any dieback. Hey, my buddy. So everyone, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden, they are all linked in the Amazon storefront in the video description. And I wish you all the best of luck in this frost and freeze event that's coming really late in the season. Please be careful out there, and let me know how you fared in the comments below after it's all said and done. I'll make sure to update you all on my garden as well. Hopefully we survive. Thanks for watching, everyone.